Welcome to the India Energy Hour, where we explore the biggest questions shaping energy transitions, climate action, and sustainable development in India and beyond. Your hosts for this episode are Shreya Jai, energy writer and policy analyst, and Dr. Sandeep Pai, energy transition researcher and author. The show is produced by 101 Reporters, a pan-India network of grassroots reporters that produces original stories from rural India. If you enjoy listening to the India Energy Hour, please rate us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Over the past decade, India has emerged as one of the world's leading renewable energy markets. Clear policy direction, competitive markets, and strong public and private investments have helped drive this transformation. But as the energy transition enters its next phase, new challenges are emerging. From grid modernization and energy storage to affordable finance and regional cooperation. In this episode, we are joined by Gauri Singh, Deputy Director General of the International Renewable Energy Agency and one of the key architects of India's flagship national solar mission. With over 3 decades of experience in renewable energy policy and international cooperation, she shares insights from India's clean energy journey and discusses what lies ahead for India and the Global South.
Hello and welcome to the India Energy Hour, Ms. Singh. We have been planning to get you for some time now. I think this plan has been working for years. But thank you again for joining us here. You're part of our Centuries special. We've just crossed 100th episode. So happy to have you here and looking forward to learning from your fascinating journey in the clean energy sector.
So thank you so much for having me on this podcast. It's always a pleasure to talk to specialized podcasts that really are working around the sector, the energy sector. And I think with India as such a fast growing sector, I think it's there are developments that happen. Very frequently, so it's always good to be able to speak about it and do some thinking around what next.
Absolutely, and we are looking forward to capture both the developments and what future holds. I'll start with you. You are definitely a very well-known person, but our audience would love to know a bit about your journey. You've spent 3 decades now, if not more, working across the renewable energy sector. In India, you are part of you're the founding member team, which was responsible behind the national solar mission, the first tenders that were rolled out, which led to the creation of this vibrant sector that there is. And then you had this global energy transition into IRENA. So your journey, in a way, if I can say so, has moved in tandem with the growth of the sector in India. So can you talk about some of your key roles and some professional milestones which have defined your work in the sector?
No, it's been I have to say it's been a very interesting journey and in a sector that I've thoroughly enjoyed being a part of. And I think as part of the very small founding team it seems like a long time back. And when you say 3 decades, it really does feel long. But it was a small team that was given a very big challenge and a very short time to deliver. And I think the fact that we did not just do a cut and paste of what many other countries at that time were doing, which was more like feed-in tariff, but really went the auction route. I think that pretty much has been a major breakthrough in which India's renewable energy sector has scaled and continues to grow. Because with that, there was a very strong ecosystem that got built around the sector, which was pretty much non-existent when the solar mission started. And I remember that it was a lot of the companies that started with 1 megawatt of solar and now they have a portfolio which goes into gigawatts of solar and wind. So it has been really quite fascinating watching the journey of how the ecosystem has responded and also how good policies can really unleash economic development and also bring in the capabilities of the private sector to walk in tandem with what the government really is looking for. So it really has been, a way for me to really reflect on the power of policy, and that's something that I have in many ways taken along with me as I've moved and was working in the at a much more global scale, because at the end of it, you do come to know whether a policy is working or not, because you will not see any investments, you will not see any energy behind it if the policy is just not customized to the local conditions. So that's one thing. But I think in a way, what really happened and how it unfolded in India has helped me also work with many other countries who are just beginning their journeys. And to be able to work with a large number of those countries where the where renewables was just beginning to show up, and to be able to convince them to move along that path, I think that has been something again which has been very satisfying. And whatever small contribution one could make in it has allowed me to really think back on where we are right now, because right now the kind of work that is happening and the kind of messaging that at IRENA we are really focusing on is the fact that while deployment is moving ahead, you don't see the same kind of investments moving in the grids and the infrastructure. And also, while there is a kind of a momentum around the electricity generation and electrification, but you don't really see that momentum happening in the end use sector. And that is really leading to an understanding that you have to have a very holistic and a comprehensive view at what energy is all about. So while energy is a very much an enabling aspect of how the economy will grow, but it does impact every sector of the economy. And till such time the countries don't start looking at a very coordinated approach around how various key sectors will use energy and what they can do with making their national objectives a priority in this case, and things will not move at the pace that they are capable of moving. And that's pretty much something that I've been now working on to see how to bring in that kind of a more coordinated approach and advise countries accordingly. So let me stop here.
No, thank you. And it's interesting to know that you're building these threads together and across so many different countries. I'll start with India because in a way, India's signature of how renewable energy growth has happened, that the renewable energy can be deployed at an unprecedented scale, at the same time driving the costs down. So I want to first understand from your perspective that how important was long-term policy signals and clear national targets which were ambitious then, which continue to be ambitious now, in creating an investor confidence.
So let me put it like this: that the India story, what it really tells you is of course the experience is important, but It what it really tells you is how ambition becomes policy, how policy then goes ahead and creates markets, and how this dynamic between policy, markets, and the need for investments in grid storage, financing, and institution building then plays out as you move into the into a more advanced stage. So, in a sense, this is extremely good example of the challenges that have been tackled at various stages of this growth, and they have been tackled in a way that are very much customized to how the institutional capacities in India are, to what the status of the grid is, to what the status of the manufacturing is, and also the developers and the ecosystem around it. So I think that is extremely important because in many ways, India has demonstrated that as access increased, or rather, we achieved access in the last decade. This decade in India has all been about how do you meet the rising demand, how do you keep the power affordable, how do you reduce the import dependence and build domestic industries, and also how do you bring in the industries and get them to walk along to decarbonize as we move forward. So, and for all this to happen, it goes without saying that the long-term policy signals are absolutely the key. Because, what did happen as the Indian story unfolded was that there was, a very clear visibility of what India wanted to do in the short term, but also in the long term. So there were targets that were set, clear targets were set for 2020 and then 2022 and then and so on. Now, just setting targets, many countries have done that. It doesn't help, we all know, because these targets are, of course, critical to reduce that kind of uncertainty and to put our intent make it very transparent and visible to the investors and to the developers. But the other signal that you're also giving through this is the signal that goes out to the manufacturers, to grid operators, to regulators, and to the financing institutions. But also we need to be mindful that um, you know having a good policy, having clear targets, if it's not backed by very strong implementation plan, then it could lead to nothing, because all this needs to be translated into something that can bring a pipeline of projects that are ready to get deployed, and understanding from the utilities which are ready to buy this power. It did involve putting out some guarantees in the shape of very strong PPAs, but it wasn't just the PPAs. It was also doing a back end connect with uh, who would pick up this kind of a supply. So where would the demand come from, and how would that get equitably distributed throughout the country? So what I'm trying to say is that if India today has achieved 50% of its cumulative installed electric power capacity from non-fossil fuels. Um, and we achieved this last year, so almost 5 years ahead of the target NDC target that we had given. It hasn't been without working on multiple fronts, and it needed needed all of the power sector to come together in its various implementation with all its implementation mechanisms, the regulators to come together, the financing institutions to come together, and and to be able to now move from just a capacity target to more of a generation target, because even now the generation from non-fossil fuels is about 30%. So if that generation has to be increased, this is like it's going to be a step change. So you can't keep doing more of the same. And the policies around it, the implementation mechanisms, the institutional capacity, all has to be rethought. So what I'm really saying is that it's not that you can be satisfied that you have now policy and it will just keep carrying you into the various stages that the energy transition will have to go through, but a continuous relook, not at an incremental level, not at looking at one regulation at a time or something like that, but to really have that kind of a holistic thinking about what will it take to take us into the step change that the energy transition is really asking us for.
Absolutely. And I'll get back to these all these step changes and what the next frontier of growths are. But before getting into that, just very quickly, this competitive procurement mechanism that India had, where you're tying from one end to another end, this has been one of the central, point of this India RE story. For other developing economies, do you think that there are lessons that can be drawn from India's RE growth stories, say a procurement mechanism, how to get the states on board, how to redesign the PPAs, or any other thing? What are the lessons that other global South nations can take from India's story?
So you're absolutely right that the competitive procurement and was very critical, because the first very visible thing that it did was to bring down the costs very rapidly. And that was a key in making renewables much more acceptable by the state utilities, which are they don't have such a robust balance sheet. So that pretty much was very helpful. But I think the fact that you did see guarantees also being worked alongside, because there was a lot of issues that came from the financial institutions about whether the state utilities, which everyone knew were not in the best of shape, would actually be able to pay the kind of tariff that was being that had been discovered. And I think having that kind of a arrangement where that kind of a guarantee was provided to the financial institutions by a central government entity stepping in to tie up the procurement, the supply agreements. And the fact that before these auctions actually had happened, you also had um, put out it was a small kind of a experiment of 100 megawatts, where one megawatt was being awarded, 1 to 5 megawatts were being awarded, and that actually also brought up the confidence of local developers that they will be able to put out a plant that, till such time that the solar mission had come, we did not have a single kilowatt of grid connected solar electricity. So there were multiple things that had been put together. There was also a local content requirement, knowing that we would be scaling up and manufacturing would need to happen eventually, which was also part of this whole solar mission. So I think we need to be mindful that there's not you do need a anchor, which the competitive procurement mechanism provided, but there were multiple other, I would say, um, smaller pieces that needed to come together to make it all happen. And which is clearly why you are now looking at auctions that are now starting, which have started for round the clock power. So it's a very different kind of a scenario that's unfolding, which requires the developers to come up with much more firm power as they generate variable power. But my thinking really is that is it perhaps also the time for the auctions to think about bringing in the states more actively, and doing a kind of a competitive bid amongst them to see which state would like to have more more of the um, more of the deployment capacity getting on the ground, because there are also issues that now developers are facing about how do the transmission grids connect. So there is a very strong role that the states will have to also play, and they need to become as active stakeholders in these large central procurement auctions by bringing their effort in identifying land, in identifying the connectivity to transmission grids, and mapping out those areas so that when the auctions do happen, there is really a kind of a healthy competition that happens between the states to get the developers into the state, because it also means a lot of tax revenue. Let's not forget that.
Agreed. Good, you mentioned about round the clock power because I wanted to come on that point only because energy storage is the next frontier in the growth of renewable energy. However, though different kind of models have come in, cost and deployment remain uneven across several regions. You know, there is innovations happening, technology is coming in, but still cost is yet to fall to a point where, as you said, distribution utilities, especially such as in India and several other countries, should be comfortable with that kind of cost. So I wanted to understand from you that what kind of project modeling or financial modeling is required, which would help in scaling up of energy storage.
So let me start by saying I think the initiatives that have been taken in India, which have been funded from the Power System Development Fund, which provides like a viability gap funding, and also the other viability gap funding schemes. They're a very good initiative, but as we move forward, storage will become very much central to the power systems that are taking in more and more generation from renewables. And so it should not just be treated like a add-on. It has to be part of the entire system planning, where there is a planning for flexibility, there's a planning for how the investments need to flow into managing this kind of a flexibility. Because if this is not done, and if we go project to project, then we're really wasting and not optimizing. Let me say, we are not optimizing resources to the best of how they can be. In fact, we have at IRENA we've done a flexibility report which estimates that by 2030 the power sector would require three times more daily flexibility, 2.5 than what it was in 2019, and about 2.5 times more weekly flexibility than what it was in 2019, and almost twice as much as the monthly flexibility, which means that the need to integrate these flexibility requirements into the power sector modeling are becoming key. So right now, when you do a round the clock auction, it is the onus is on the developer to provide um, that kind of a storage that would allow them to provide around the clock renewables. But I think it's the times really come to look at where are the flexibility measures most optimally deployed, because we don't have in India some huge resources that we can deploy inefficiently. So to bring in efficiency into the system, there needs to be that modeling that enables us to identify the right places and then bring in investments to make that happen. So I would say, it's and as you know, that storage can be multiple. It can have multiple dimensions. It can be storage that's responding to quick responses that might be needed. It might be storage that can be seasonal and more like, as I said, weekly or daily or monthly. So the storage portfolio has to be seen uh, as a portfolio. So it's a number of solutions. It could be also solutions like looking at sector coupling. Sector coupling works very well. It could also be looking at whether there are interconnections which could be cross boundary, which could have a role. Also, maybe looking at places where thermal generation using sustainable fuels can be brought in, or pump storage, as I spoke about. But clearly, what's important is that um, when you are looking at a long term PPA, storage needs to be built in as a part of the contract. So, you have to be looking at uh, making the need for flexibility and thereby bringing in storage as something that gets priced by the market as well. So, if you want to look at avoiding the kind of curtailment that's currently happening in a number of projects, this thing has to be costed in. This has to have a value. So whether it comes through time of the day pricing, which regulators can think about, so it's more demand side management, whether it gets combined with mechanisms that are around peak tariffs, or whether it is a reward to avoid curtailment, or address grid congestion. These are some of the mechanisms that need to be priced when these kind of auctions are done. So it's important that storage is not seen as just I would say just an add-on to get to a more firm renewables, but it has to be seen as a very important service that is being provided, that should be costed and valued, because that is what will bring more renewables into the grid in the long term.
Agreed. And on flexibility, I think when we talk about energy storage or increasing the absorption of renewable energy, it seems the onus always falls on renewable energy project developers. They are responsible for round the clock, they're responsible for setting up energy storage. But I think going forward, the whole power system needs to reimagine itself. And as you said, needs to become flexible. There are some plans in place, like we keep hearing, thermal power companies such as NTPC in India planning to have flexible thermal power generation so as to make room for absorbing as much RE as possible. The grid planning its operations around renewable energy deployment. So I think both the policies and infrastructure planning going forward needs to center around renewable energy, unlike fossil fuel like it used to be earlier. Would love to hear your thoughts.
No, I absolutely agree, because we are now. It's not as if we are newcomers in this sector anymore. We know which are the areas where more renewable energy deployment will happen. We know it's Western India. We know which are the areas where wind will happen, whether it's through repowering or offshore winds and all. So in many ways, there is a fairly clear mapping of those areas where resources, variable renewable resources will get injected into the system. And I think just as the modeling happens for making sure that the frequency of the grid remains stable, I think there's also a need to start integrating this whole flexibility modeling into the system. So it has to actually become a part of the system, because renewables is not there it's not there to stay, it's there to even grow. So, and anything related to grid, it takes a long time. It has a gestation period. It has a need to really think about how, because it's a very interconnect. We have a pan-India grid. So, anything that happens on at one end has consequences for the remaining other parts of the grid. So I think it's very important to look at all this. But I was, just we were doing this kind of a use case for AI study. And in Spain, we have found that with that big debacle which happened, and we all know there was a blackout in Europe, they have now started integrating and investing very heavily into the AI applications that are helping them manage the grid and create that kind of a flexibility to manage congestions much better. So, in fact, the capacity of the grid has got sizably enhanced. So, these things happen when you start thinking that flexibility is something that needs to be built as a part of the existing system, not as a add-on on when there's a crisis and then we think about it. And as I said, we have to look at an optimum utilization of our resources, whether it's coming as funding or whatever we have done in terms of grid planning, because just having it as a part or on the onus of the developers, in my mind, is a very project by project approach. And it's a very ad hoc approach that doesn't really look at what the strength of the power system really is, which is the ability to integrate it into a systems thinking and a system kind of a planning and approach.
Right. I now come to a much wider issue, and this pertains the global south, including India. Where do energy access, its affordability, and decarbonization needs to be pursued simultaneously, especially for a country like India, where we have the 2070 goal, 2047 goal for net zero and becoming a developed nation simultaneously. So how should, policymakers balance these objectives? And if you want, you can address it both for India and for Global South.
See, I think let me talk about the global south first. And from the many countries that we have been interacting with, what's very clear in the developing countries that still renewables by themselves, even though the cost have gone down, there have been enough best practices around policy and all of that. But unless the policy gets tied in with their development goals, the countries really are not looking at any advocacy that looks at moving away from fossil fuels into renewables just for the sake of doing that kind of a substitution or switch, which then means that uh, I think also the geopolitics that have emerged around energy recently are also showing up in a way that countries are looking at. um making sure that there is also energy sovereignty. And I think that is also a very big, very big kind of a um, situation that is confronting a large number of countries where there is volatility in the price of fossil fuels, and that's impacting their economies. So, naturally, I think the countries, the developing countries, need to look at how they want to manage energy sovereignty or to develop their own resources in a way that also addresses their development goals. In the case of India, I mean, when we see the kind of deployment that has happened, it's not just the fact that we've been able to address energy access, but in a and keep energy still affordable. But it's you need to see that this has happened because of very strong political will, backed by a policy that brought these aspects together. There's no one formula to say, you have to do this to reach your objectives, which any policy would the objectives will be multiple objectives that they need to address. You have to look at how affordability will continue to happen when you develop renewable energy. You have to also look at, in fact, you have to look at the whole cost of the reliable service that renewables will provide, which is including the cost of generation, the grids, the storage, the financing, and of course the bills of the consumers who need to be buying. So we have in fact been always stating that renewable power and energy efficiency, these can, to put it into perspective, can of course reduce the health impacts of fossil fuel usage, but more importantly, have the ability to increase and improve the energy security, insulate them from the volatility that we are seeing of the price shocks that are happening, but also support local value creation. That local value creation can come in so many ways. It can be the local jobs that open up for the youth. It can come in the shape of addressing the social inequities that energy access will bring, and can also be looked at by some elements of local manufacturing, or at least assembling, that will create small kind of manufacturing hubs that can carry these forward. So while it has the ability to address these multiple goals, but all these can, to balance these kind of objectives, the planning that is needed has to be very integrated and comprehensive. So, you have to look at how, say, for example, um, utility systems going with renewable power can reduce the system's cost. You have to look at how distributed renewables can support access, can support resilience, how energy efficiency can reduce the bills of the customers and reduce the size of the investment that is needed. Looking at clean cooking solutions and rooftop solars, mini grids, and productive use of this energy that can actually increase the productivity of many farm operations, for example, or making better health facilities available, and directly impacting the households and livelihoods. Because very much, as I said, the development agenda of the global south has to be at the forefront when we talk about renewable energy, and it's very much justified because obviously they're still at that stage of of getting access to all their citizens, and need to look at solutions that can be at the best cost solutions. I mean, I think, if you look at also how habitation is growing in most of these countries, is that you will have, I've seen this in a large number of African countries, where there will be a few towns which have large population that's gravitated towards them in those urban and peri-urban areas. And then you have population which is mostly consisting of women, elderly, and children that are left behind to eke out sustainable livelihoods and agriculture. And to be able to get access by drawing traditional lines of transmission will not be the most optimal solution. So very different solutions need to be looked at, but that's where renewable energy is so well amenable to these kind of solutions. So it's about making sure that when you get into these access solutions, there are so many ways in which the modularity of renewable energy deployment can really help in bringing these solutions to life.
Right, but there remains a significant challenge, and that pertains to money. Despite the rapid decline in cost, despite countries having efficient models where they marry economic development with green energy growth, many countries in global south still struggle to find affordable capital. First of all,
Hmm.
why does this financing gap persist, and what are some of the ways that this gap can be narrowed?
So, talking about the financing gap, and you're absolutely correct. There is uh, a lot of disparity between how the capital is flowing to the developed world, to the emerging economies, and to the developing countries. Where to the developing countries, it's really almost in a single digit. That's the kind of percentage that goes to the developing countries, and the reason why um, financing has become expensive in these countries. I mean, of course, there's an issue of scale. So, how much capital is going, that is, of course, a question. But at what cost? So, if you look at a lot of developing countries and economies, you will see that the cost of capital is actually a factor um, of the currency risk being priced in or factored in, the off-taker risk also getting factored in. There's also the political risk and the regulatory risk, the grid risk, for example. All these get factored in. So if the cost of capital in developed countries um, is say X, the cost of capital in the developing countries which really need it, both in terms of the scale but also need it at a lower cost. But because of all these things getting factored in, it becomes a multiple of about, it could go anywhere between 4x to 5x times. And that then means that everything becomes more expensive. The cost at which so it's not just the technology cost that we know is going down. But when you start looking at how it gets financed and at what cost, unfortunately, all these things get factored in to get to a LCOE which will be much higher than in those countries which have a better risk management or a risk mitigation, or are able to manage the currency risk or even the off-taker risk, for example. So that is unfortunately the case. But there's another factor. I mean, uh, um, we've also studied a large number of countries where we found that there is very heavy custom duty on the import of the equipment, the renewable energy equipment. Now, naturally, that also adds to the cost. So, I think the policymakers haven't really done their thinking around how to make sure that this is really the need of the day, considering that this has to be as a part of their whole policy to or strategic thinking to do energy sovereignty and bring in more control over their energy sources. But if you actually start um, outpricing these as compared to gen sets, see, it's not just that these equipment are getting a lot of custom duty, but you have to also compare it with what is being incentivized. If what is being incentivized is a gen set which runs on diesel, then you know that there's something very wrong. So, if I can, just talk about a country which decided to, really finish their custom duties and the brought down the cost of import to almost what it cost and reduce that, then, and this is actually what has happened in Pakistan, for example, where it's not been led by the government. So the government, I mean, we all know that they have a huge issue in terms of outages and all. But what they did do is to almost get the custom duty to a negligible amount, and it was then the private sector that stepped in. And by private sector, I mean individual householders that said that we will be happy to import, and the entire market started getting flooded with assembling units that could actually deliver these solutions to the households that wanted these solutions put. So it's a very stark example of how even small changes, when you look at the impact of this on the larger economy, and in terms of the so many jobs it would have created, and it has also brought in energy independence for many households from the grid and brought their costs down. So it has had a huge impact on the lives of their citizens. So, one has to look at also, not just look at the constraints that the developing countries might have, but look at those areas where they can actually do, they themselves have to review their policies and create those enabling conditions for more deployment to happen. It may not be utility scale that is happening, it might be, in kilowatts, but then kilowatts add up, which is what has happened. I mean, they've added huge amount of gigawatts, which is all coming from these small kilowatts that have got aggregated and added up.
No, I agree to all of that, and very fascinating examples across global south. Pakistan is one of the case. India definitely is a case that we discussed at length here. Just very quickly, and I would like you to summarize this conversation with this question that looking ahead in the next decade, where do you see greatest opportunities for collaboration between India and other emerging economies, where we both all of us can bring some models together, bring some innovation together, especially financing, cross country financing, some models that can be built which benefits us all.
So I think, there are huge number of very robust best practices that we have kind of mapped out and done a deep dive in at IRENA on what has really seemed to have worked well. And I think the greatest opportunities of collaboration will lie around practical implementation. So, looking at How do you do collaboration around interconnection of grids? That's going to be the key because um, in India is a different case, but if you look at many other countries, their own market is very small. So, but when you can actually come together, develop interconnected grids, and have a regional market going, that is when serious developers and manufacturers will come in to set up base to address those needs. So that's definitely something that I think needs to be looked at. Then, of course, there is also, I think, the need to look at how some countries, and I'll give you the example of Brazil here, how it has developed they have this development bank called BNDES, which is a development bank and has worked a lot in the energy sector and a lot in the renewables also. But it is a institutional capability that has been built up over the years, which allows for foreign investment to come in, and at that institutional level they are able to do the risk mitigation that a investor from abroad requires. So it's a institutional capability that also needs to be built up, because as the scope of this whole energy transition starts becoming larger, there is a need to clearly collaborate, look at examples of what is working well, of institutional buildings that are not what we have seen till now, but they're looking really far ahead to look at what needs to be done for the future. So that's also an area where I think collaboration could be very helpful. So we know that there is collaboration in terms of bringing together the new development bank, for example, was a good creation that came out of BRICS. That works on a very different premise than the earlier Bretton Woods institutions. Um, I also think that the experience that has been built up, and the very rich experience and expertise that has been built up in countries around managing their grid flexibility and managing their storage solutions, that's a clearly a area where I think collaboration could really help in being able to do very strong knowledge sharing. Um, Again, as I said, there is a aspiration from a lot of countries to have manufacturing within their countries, but their markets are not large enough, and which means that there is this real opportunity to develop regional markets, which come up not just as markets for bringing in manufacturing capacity and building an ecosystem, but also function as a very efficient electricity market. So these are again, we know from the example of Europe how the electricity market is works very well between the many countries that are part of the EU. So that again is something that in my view, is a very strong area where countries could collaborate and learn from each other.
Yeah, let's hope so that happens and we'll see very interesting, innovative projects to come out of it. You mentioned about intercountry grid, and I think that is a fascinating project. We'll see how it goes forward. And I think there are several areas of collaboration. So many economists have talked about, building financing models where countries can, finance each other's growth. But thank you so much. This was such a 360-degree view of the sector, not just from the point of view of India, but from the global south. And only you could have done that. Thank you so much for this conversation. Very, very glad to have talked to you today on this.
No, thank you so much. Thank you for this opportunity. It's always a pleasure, as I said, to talk to people from the sector. because I think, we need to spread the awareness and we need to bring these conversations to the forefront. And which I hope, the work that you're doing would definitely be contributing to. So thank you again.
Yeah, happy to do that, and we'll continue to do it. The conversation with you actually has given us several ideas for our upcoming episodes, and we'll keep you posted on that. Thank you again.
Thank you for listening to the India Energy Hour. Subscribe to this channel to never miss an update. To drop us a feedback, visit our website or write to us at theindiaenergyhour@gmail.com. We are on Twitter. You can follow @DIEH Podcast and get in touch with the two hosts, at Shreya and at Sandeep Pai. Thank you for tuning in. Join us again for our next episode.